I heard the story once about a pet store delivery truck, one of those big box trucks that was going down the road. And at every stoplight, the guy would get out of the truck, run to the back of the truck, grab a 2x4, beat it against the side, and then get back in and proceed to the next stoplight. Nobody could figure out what was going on. So finally, somebody asked him, "What are you doing?" And he said, "This is only a 2-ton truck, and I'm carrying 4 tons of canaries. So I have to keep 2 tons in the air all the time." Now, when I heard that, I thought that is the perfect image for our world sometimes. How many of us are stuck with heavy loads? Stuck trying to keep the birds in the air? Stuck stopping at every stoplight? Stuck running back to the truck and then trying to get back to the front before the light turns green? And in the process, we're depleted of energy, and the birds are always terrified. We have a tendency to get stuck in life, stuck in our relationships, stuck in bad habits, stuck in grief, stuck in anger, stuck in our work. We have a tendency to get stuck. And what happens is once you get stuck, you start to feel anxious that you're stuck. You say, I wish I could get out of this, but I can't. And then you have a lot of anxiety after you can't get out of it and can't change. And then comes anxiety about being anxious, and you say, I should be able to change. And then after the anxiety comes anger at yourself. I ought to be able to change, but you don't. And then your anxiety and anger turns into fear that I'm never going to get out of this, and it's got control of me. And then your fear eventually turns into depression, and you start feeling sorry for yourself and having a pity party. And you resign and say, I give up, I can't change. And you start the cycle all over again, only to get further and further stuck. In 1965, there was a Senate subcommittee that predicted by now technology would have made us so productive we would only be working 20 hours a week. They were actually worried that about what we would do with all our boredom. Anybody bored? Instead, we live in a 24-hour cycle with access to our offices and a 40-plus hour work week for many of us, regardless of industry. We are more sleep-deprived and more anxious than ever. And the tragedy is that we often treat rest as just one more thing to add to the checklist. I need to practice yoga. I need to keep my car clean. I need to work out. I need to write that novel that's been percolating in me. I probably should start some sort of a Sabbath routine. But when rest becomes a requirement, it isn't rest. It's just more work. And we feel we have to deserve our rest as if we're somehow earning vacation days from God. How many of you have lived by the sentiment, I'll rest when I'm dead? I know I've used that phrase a few times in my life, most often during grad school, and it's part of the problem. We are not created to die. We are created to live here and now, and part of that healthy, robust, holy life means learning the rhythm of rest. In Matthew's gospel, we encounter the word yoke. Now, for those of you who did not grow up in an agricultural environment and didn't plow fields with oxen, I want to spend a little time in the context of this word yoke. It stems from the ancient world, where the yoke was a wooden frame that helped 2 animals, most often oxen, work together. The farmer would yoke a young ox with an experienced seasoned ox to help them learn the rhythm of plowing the field. And when the seasoned ox and the young ox were yoked together, the veteran didn't pull all the weight. The veteran sets the pace. If the younger ox tries to bolt ahead in a fit of overachieving energy, the young ox pulls tight and slows him. The wise ox pulls tight and slows him down. If the young ox lags behind in exhaustion, the weight of the older, steady ox pulls him forward. The yoke isn't about sharing the weight, it's about forced alignment. Jesus is sitting on a hill teaching the disciples, and the conclusion of his whole teaching is this idea of rest. Jesus isn't asking us to take on another burden. He's asking us to share the load. He's inviting us to take off what might be a single yoke we have around our shoulders and step into a two-harness yoke. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, and you shall find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. There's two types of yokes, right? There's the double yoke, and then there's one for a single person that lays across the neck, the kind of burden that's most difficult because you're carrying it all yourself. The other yoke, the double yoke, when two are connected together, shares one another bearing the burden. Now, further, in the first century, the yoke also was a metaphor used by rabbis to describe the law. To take on a rabbi's yoke meant to adopt their specific interpretation of how you are to live. And so many rabbis during this time made the yoke heavy with hundreds and hundreds of regulations, leaving people exhausted. And so when Jesus says, "My yoke is easy," the Greek word for easy means well-fitting. He isn't saying the work disappears. He's saying that the harness is custom-made for you. Unlike the heavy legalistic yoke of the world that chafes and scars us, Jesus offers a partnership that fits our very soul. We find this idea of chafing and scarring, issues of control, echoed in Paul's letter to the Philippians. We are told, be anxious for nothing. Now, whenever I hear Paul tell me to be anxious, to be non-anxious, I tend to get a little snarky because there is so much for us to be anxious about, Paul. I mean, it's easy to write, be anxious for nothing when you're sitting on your Mediterranean villa, Paul. But I've got a mortgage, a kid with 102-degree fever, 24-hour news cycle screaming about war, and it's February in Colorado and there's not a flake of snow on the ground, which some of you know what that's going to mean in August. My world is a pressure cooker, Paul, and you're telling me to relax? Must be nice when you don't have an inbox to manage. The challenge is we think Paul lived in a simpler time. But his world was overflowing with life and death stakes. Paul was anxious. He was shipwrecked. He was beaten. He was frequently imprisoned. He was constantly defending his reputation against other apostles who tried to ruin his ministry. He mentions his daily pressure and the anxiety of that fledgling, messy church he started. And he was a Roman citizen living under the thumb of Nero, a leader who was far more unpredictable and violent than any modern politician. Just going to leave that right there for you. I'm going to let you decide how you want to interpret that. But here's what Paul is saying to us. Paul got rid of his anxiety by recognizing that God's redeeming work happens whether we're involved or not. Rabbi Abraham Heschel once noted, Sabbath rest is the realization that this world can survive without you for 24 hours. Rest is not a reward for finished work. It is the act of trusting a more connected, more powerful force that moves beyond us. The reason we say, I'll rest when I'm dead, is because deep down, we believe the world rests on our shoulders. Control is the addiction. Busyness is just the symptom. We stay busy because if we stop, we have to face the terrifying reality that we might not be as indispensable as we think we are. To rest is to admit that the universe functions well without our management. Sharing the yoke of Christ is the ultimate ego check for us. In families, we often do things for one another we're not crazy about doing. If I lived alone, I would not care about Taylor Swift, Bad Bunny, or the video game Fortnite on Xbox. But the people in my house do. So I have to be all in. Being in community means giving of ourselves in order to be part of the tribe. We have to let go of what we want for them, and vice versa. I explained this to my family in a slightly manipulative way, I'll admit, that this is a dynamic we hold for one another. And one thing I love is J.R.R. Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings, which I asked my family to watch together. The extended version of the trilogy is only 14 hours. But in the first book, there is this quote that reminds us of the yoke we carry. In the Fellowship of the Rings, the sojourners are stuck in a mine under this great mountain. And the main character, Frodo, must physically carry the burden of the evil ring of Sauron to the lava pits to be destroyed in the volcano. And they're taking a rest when Frodo says to the wise wizard Gandalf, "I wish the ring had never come to me. I wish none of this had happened." And Gandalf replies, "So do all who live to see such times. But that is not for them to decide. All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given to us." My son didn't choose to be sick. He couldn't choose to be well. He was fighting a battle he could not win until he decided to stop kicking and screaming and let my arm be his yoke. He surrendered his "I don't want to" nap and allowed himself to be held instead. We don't decide the time we're given, and we don't decide the burdens that are placed upon us, but we do decide who shares the yoke. Will you keep beating the side of the truck to keep the canaries in the air, or will you let a community and your Savior carry the load with you?